Hello, I'm Harry Glorikian, and this is the Harry Glorikian Show, where we explore how technology is changing everything we know about healthcare. My guest today is Eric Daimler, a serial software entrepreneur and a former Presidential Innovation Fellow in the Obama administration. And he has an interesting argument about math. Daimler says if you're a young person today trying to decide which math course you're going to take, or maybe an older person who just wants to brush up, you shouldn't bother with trigonometry or calculus. Instead, he says you should study category theory. That's a field that isn't even part of the curriculum at most high schools. But it's increasingly important in computer science. Category theory is about the relationship between sets or structures. It can be used to prove that different structures are consistent or compatible with one another, and to prove that the relationships in a data set are still intact even after you've transformed the data in some way. Together with two former MIT mathematicians, Daimler co-founded a company called Connexus that uses category theory to tackle the problem of data interoperability. Longtime listeners of the show know that data interoperability in healthcare, or more often the lack of interoperability, is one of my biggest hobby horses. In fields from drug discovery to frontline medical care, we've got petabytes of data to work with, in the form of electronic medical records, genomic and proteomic data, and clinical trial data. That data could be the fuel for machine learning and other kinds of computation that could help us develop drugs faster and make smarter decisions about care. The problem is, it's all stored in different databases and formats and can't be safely merged without a nightmarish amount of work. So when someone like Daimler says that they have a way to use math to bring heterogeneous data together without compromising that data's integrity, well, I pay attention. And on today's show, we're all going back to school for an introductory class in category theory from Connexus CEO Eric Daimler. Eric, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
So, I was reading your varied background. I mean, you've worked in so many different kinds of organizations. I'm not sure that there was a compact way or even an accurate way to describe you. So can you describe yourself, what do you do and what are your main interest areas?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to describe me might come from my mother. Well, where somebody asked her, is that your husband, the doctor? And she says, well, yes, but he's not the type that helps people. So I've been doing a research around artificial intelligence, AI, from a lot of different perspectives around my research in graph theory and machine learning and computational linguistics. I've been a venture capitalist on Sand Hill Road. I've done entrepreneurship, started a couple of businesses, which I'm doing now. And most notably, I was doing policy in Washington, D.C. as part of the Obama administration for a time. So I am often known for that last part, but my background really is rare, if not unique, for having the exposure to AI from all of those angles, from business, academia, and policy.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at obviously the like you said, the one thing that jumped out to me was you were in the Presidential Innovation Fellow in the Obama administration in 2016. Can you give listeners an idea of what is the Presidential Innovation Fellowship Program? Who are the types of people that are fellows and what kind of things do they do?
Sure. It was, I guess with that sort of question, it's helpful then to give a broader picture, even how it started. There was a program started during the Nixon administration that's colloquially known as the science advisors to the president, a bipartisan group to give science advice to the president. That's called the OSTP, Office of Science and Technology Policy. There are experts within that group that know everything from space to cancer, to be super specific, to, in my domain, computer security. And I was the authority, I was the sole authority during my time in artificial intelligence. So there are other people with other expertise. There are people in different capacities. I had the particular capacity I had, the particular title that I had, that was a one-year term. The staffing for these things goes up and down depending on the administration in ways that you might be able to predict and guess. The people with those titles also find themselves in different parts of the executive branch. So they will do a variety of things that are not predicted by the title of fellow. My particular role that I happened to be doing was in helping to coordinate on behalf of the president, humbly, on behalf of the president, the research agenda across the executive branch. There are some very able people with whom I had the good fortune of working during my time there, some of which are now in the Biden administration. And again, it's to be a nonpartisan effort around artificial intelligence, and both sides should really be advocates for having our research agenda in government be most effective. But my role was coordinating such things as, really, this is helpful, the definition of robotics, which you might be surprised by as a reflex, but quickly find to be useful when you're thinking that the Defense Department's definition and use, therefore, of robotics is really fundamentally different than that of Health and Human Services use and a definition of robotics in the VA and Department of Energy and state and so forth. So that we find to be useful to be coordinated by the Office of the President and experts speaking on behalf. It was started or this additional impulse was started after the effects, I'll generously call them, of healthcare.gov and the trip ups there, where President Obama, to his great credit, realized that we needed to attract more technologists into government. That we had a lot of lawyers, to be sure. We had a lot of academics, but we didn't have a lot of business people, practical technologists. So he created a way to get people like me motivated to come into government for short periods of time. The idea was that you could sit around a cabinet meeting, and you would never be able to raise your hand saying, "Oh, I don't know anything about economics," or "I don't know anything about foreign policy." But you could raise your hand and say, "Oh, I don't know anything about technology." That needs to be a thing of the past. And President Obama saw that and created a program, starting with Todd Park, the second chief technology officer of the United States, who's fantastic, to start some programs to bring in people like me.
Oh yeah, and believe me, in healthcare, we need more technologists. Which I always preach. I'm like, don't go to Facebook, come here. You can get double whammy. You can make money and you can affect people's lives. So I'm always preaching that to everybody. But so, if I'm not mistaken, in early 2021, you wrote an open letter to the brand new Biden administration calling for sort of a big federal effort to improve national data infrastructure. Like, can you summarize for everybody the argument in that piece? And do you see them doing any of the items that you're suggesting?
Right. The idea is that despite us making some real good efforts during the Obama administration with solidifying our view on artificial intelligence across the executive, and this continuing actually into the Trump administration with the establishment of an AI office inside the OSTP. So, credit where credit is due. That extended into the Biden administration, where some very well-meaning people can be focusing on different parts of the conundrum of AI expressions, having various distortions. The popular one we will read about is this distortion of bias that can express itself in really ugly ways as individuals, especially for underrepresented groups. The point of the article was to help others, be reminded of some of the easy low-hanging fruit that we can work on around AI. So bias comes in a lot of different ways. The same way we all have cognitive distortions, cognitive biases. There's something like 50 of them, right? Bias can happen around gender and ethnicity and age, sexual orientation and so forth. It all can come from absence of data. There's a type of bias that's present just by being in a developed, rich country in collecting, for example, with Connexus's customers, my company Connexus's customers, where they're trying to report on their good efforts for economic and social good, and around clean renewable energies. They find that there's a bias in being able to collect data in rich countries versus developing countries. That's another type of bias. So that was the point of me writing that open letter to prioritize these letters, is just to distinguish what the low-hanging fruit was versus some of the hard problems. Some of the low-hanging fruit, I think, is available. I can say in 3 easy parts that people can remember. One is circuit breakers. So we can have circuit breakers in a lot of different parts of these automated systems. An automated car rolling down a road is the easiest example, where at some point a driver needs to take over control to make a judgment about that shadow being a person or a tumbleweed on the crosswalk. That's a type of circuit breaker. We can have the circuit breakers in a lot of different automated systems. Another one is an audit. And the way I mean as an audit is having people like me, or just generally people that are experts in the craft, being able to distinguish the data, where the biases can become possible, from the data model algorithms, where biases also can become possible. And we get a lot of efficiency from these automated systems, these learning algorithms. I think we can afford a little bit taken off to audit the degree to which these data models are doing what we intend. And an example of a data model is that Delta Airlines, they know my age and my height, and I fly to San Francisco to New York or some such thing. The data model would be their own proprietary algorithm to determine whether or not I am deserving of an upgrade to first class, for example. That's a data model. We can have other data models. A famous one that we all are part of is FICO scores, credit scores. And those don't have to be disclosed. None of us actually know what Experian or any of the credit agencies use to determine our credit scores, but they use these type of things called zero knowledge proofs, where we just send through enough data enough times that we can get a sense of what those data models are. So that's an exposure of a data model. A declarative exposure would be maybe a next best thing, a next step, and that's a type of audit. And then the third low-hanging fruit, I'd say, around regulation, and I think these are just coming towards eventualities, is demanding lineage or demanding provenance. You'll see a lot of news reports, often on less credible sites, but sometimes on shockingly credible sites, where claims are made that you need to then search yourself, and people in a hurry just won't do it. When these become very large systems and very large systems of information, large systems of automation, I want to know, how were these conclusions given? So an example in healthcare would be if my clinician gave me a diagnosis of, let's say, some sort of cancer, and then to say, here's a drug, by the way, and there's a 5% chance of there being some awful side effects. That's a connection of causation, or a connection of conclusions that I'm really not comfortable with. I want to know, like, every step, like, wait, so what type of cancer? So what's the probability of my cancer? Where is it? And so what drug? How did you make that decision? I want to know every little step of the way. It's fine that they give me that conclusion, but I want to be able to back that up. A similar example, just in everyday parlance for people, would be if I just suddenly to say, I want a house, and then houses are presented to me. I don't quite want that, although that looks like good for a Hollywood narrative. I want to say, oh, wait, what's my income? Do I want to, or what's my cash? How much, and then what's my credit? Like, how much can I afford? Oh, these are houses that you can kind of afford. Like, I want those little steps. or at least want to back out how those decisions were made available. That's a lineage. So those three things: circuit breaker, audit, lineage. Those are three pieces of low-hanging fruit that I think the European Union, the state of New York, and other government entities would be well served to prioritize.
Would love all of them, especially the healthcare example. Although I'm not holding my breath because I might not come back to life by how long I'd have to hold my breath on that one. But we're hoping for the best, and we talk about that on the show all the time. But you mentioned Connexus, and so you're one of three co-founders. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Connexus is the first ever commercial spin out from MIT's math department. The company is in the area of large scale data integration, building on insights that come out of the field of mathematics that's called category algebra, categorical algebra, or something called enterprise category theory. And to be quite honest, I did have to Wikipedia to sort of look that up, was not familiar with it. So can you explain category algebra in terms of a non-mathematician, and maybe give us a example that someone can wrap their mind around?
Yeah, and it's an important to get into, because even though what my company does is Connexus does a software expression of categorical algebra, it's really beginning to permeate our world. The way I tell my nieces and nephews is, what do quantum computers, smart contracts, and Minecraft all have in common? And the answer is composability. They are actually all composable. And what composable is it's kind of related to modularity, but it's modularity without regard to scale. So the easy analogy is in trains, where you can swap out a boxcar in a train, but mostly trains can only get to be a couple of miles long. Swapping in out boxcars, but the train is really limited in scale. Whereas the train system, the system of a train, can be infinitely large, infinitely complex. At every point in the track, you could have another track. That is the difference between modularity and composability. So Minecraft is infinitely self-referential, where you have a whole nother universe that exists in and around Minecraft. In smart contracts, that is actually not enabled without the ability to prove the efficacy, which is then enabled by categorical algebra or its sister math type theory, which they're kind of adjacent. And that's similar to quantum computing. So quantum computing is very sexy. It gets in the press quite frequently with porks and all that. You wouldn't be able to prove the efficacy of a quantum compiler. You wouldn't actually, humans, you can't actually say whether it's true or not without type theory or categorical algebra. How you think of categorical algebra, you can think of as a little bit related to graph theory, which my PhD's in. With graph theory is those things that you see, they look like spider webs. If you see the visualizations of graph theories, graphs. Category theory is a little bit related, you might say, to graph theory, but with more structure or more semantics or richness. So in each point, each node and each edge in the vernacular, you can put an infinite amount of information. That's really what a categorical algebra allows. The discovery, this was invented to be translating math between different domains of math. The discovery in 2011 from one of my co-founders, who was faculty at MIT's math department, was that we could apply that to databases. And it's in that the whole world opens up. This solves the problem that bedeviled the good folks trying to work on healthcare.gov. It allows for a good explanation of how we can prevent the next 737 MAX disaster, where individual systems certainly can be formally verified, but the whole plane doesn't have a mechanism of being formally verified with classic approaches. And it also it has application in drug discovery, where we have a way of bringing together hundreds of thousands of databases in a formal way without risk of data being misinterpreted, which is a big deal when you have a 10-year time horizon for FDA trials, and you have multiple teams coming in and out of data sets, and human instinct to hoard data and a concern about it ever becoming corrupted. This math and the software expression built upon it opens up just a fantastically rich new world of opportunity for drug discovery and for clinicians and for healthcare delivery, and the list is quite deep.
So, what does Connexus provide its clients? Is it a service? Is it a technology? Is it both? Can you give us an example of it?
Yeah, okay. So Connexus is software. Connexus is enterprise software. It's an enterprise software platform that works generally with very large organizations with generally very large, complex data infrastructures. The example I can start in healthcare, and then I can move to an even bigger one. Was with a hospital group that we worked with in New York City. I didn't even know healthcare groups could really have this problem, but it's endemic to really the world's data, where one group within the same hospital had a particular way that they represented diabetes. Now, to a layman in a healthcare sense, I would think, well, there's a definition of diabetes. I can just look it up in the Oxford English Dictionary. But this particular domain found diabetes to just be easily represented as yes, no. Do they have it? Do they not? Another group within the same hospital group thought that they would represent it as diabetes. How are we treating it? A third group would be representing it as diabetes. How long ago? And maybe a fourth group had some well-meaning clinicians that would characterize it as, well, they had it. No, they have less now, or type 1, type 2. With a more nuanced view. The traditional way of capturing that data, whether it's for drug discovery or whether it's for delivery, is to normalize it, which would then squash the fidelity of the data collected within those groups. Or they most likely they just wouldn't do it. They wouldn't collect the data. They wouldn't bring the data together because it's just too hard. It's too expensive. They would use these processes called ETL, extract, transform, load, that have been around for 30 years, but are often slow, expensive, fragile. They could take 6 months to a year, cost $1 million, deploy 50 to 100 people, generally from Accenture or Deloitte or Tata or Wipro. It's a burden. It's a burden. So the data wasn't available, and that would then impair the researchers and their ability to share data, and it would impair clinicians in their view of patient care, and it also impair the people in operations where they would work on billing. So we work with one company right now that works on 1.4 trillion records a year. They just have trouble with that volume and the number of databases, the heterogeneous data infrastructure of bringing together that data to give them one view that then can facilitate healthcare delivery. So the big example is we worked with Uber, where they have a very smart team, as smart as one might think. They also have an effectively infinite balance sheet with which they could fund an ideal IT infrastructure. But despite that, Uber grew up like every other organization, optimizing for the delivery of their service or product, right? And that doesn't entail optimizing for the IT infrastructure. So what they found, just like this hospital group with different definitions of diabetes, they found they happen to have grown up around service areas. So in this case, cities, more or less. So when then the time came to do analysis, how will, we're just passing Super Bowl weekend, how will the Super Bowl affect the supply of drivers or the demand from riders? They had to do it for the city of San Francisco, separate than the city of San Jose or the city of Oakland. They couldn't do the whole San Francisco Bay Area region, let alone the whole of the state or the whole of the country or what have you. And that repeated itself for every business question, every organizational question that they would want to have. This is the same in drug discovery. This is the same in patient care delivery or in billing. These are operational questions are hard, shockingly hard. We had another one in logistics where we had a logistics company that they had 100,000 employees. I didn't even know how some of these companies could be so big. Then they actually had a client with 100,000 employees. That client had 1,000 ships, each one of which had 10,000 containers, right? Containers.
Right.
And I didn't even know like how big these systems were. Really, I mean, I hadn't thought about it, but I mean, they're enormous. And the question to them was, hey, where's our personal protective equipment? Where's the PPE? And that's actually a hard question to ask. You know, we are thinking about maybe our FedEx tracking numbers from an Amazon order, but if you're looking at, you know, the PPE and where it is on a container inside of a ship, you know, inside this large company, it's actually a hard question to ask. So that's this question that all of these organizations have. In our case, Uber, where they had a friction in time and in money and in accuracy, asking every one of these business questions. They went then to find, well, how do I solve this problem? Do I use these old tools of ETL from the 80s? Do I use these more modern tools from the 2000s? They're called RDF or OWL, or is there something else? They discovered that they needed a more foundational system, this categorical algebra that's now expressing itself in smart contracts and quantum computers and other places. And then they found, oh, who are the leaders in the enterprise software expression of that math? And it's us. We happen to be 40 miles north of them. We're just fortunate that we worked with Uber to solve that problem in bringing together their heterogeneous data infrastructure to solve their problems. And to have them tell it, you know, they save you know, 10 million plus a year in the efficiency and speed gains from the solution we helped provide for them.
So your website says, you know, that your software can map data sources to each other so that the perfect data model is discovered, not designed. And so what does that mean? I mean, does that imply that there's some machine learning or other form of artificial intelligence involved that's sort of saying, here are the right pieces to put together, as opposed to, let me design this just for you? I'm trying to piece it together.
Yeah, you know, the way we might come at this is just reminding ourselves about the structure of artificial intelligence. You know, in the public discourse, we will often find news, I'm sure you could find it today, on deep learning, you know, whatever's going on in deep learning, because it's sexy, it's fun.
Yes.
You know, DeepMind really made a name for themselves and got them acquired at a pretty valuation because of their Hollywood-esque challenge to go and solving of that game. But that particular domain of AI, deep learning, deep neural nets, is itself just a subset of machine learning. I say just, not to minimize it. It's a fantastically powerful algorithm, but just to place it, it is a subset of machine learning. And then machine learning itself is a subset of artificial intelligence. That's a probabilistic subset. So we all know what probabilities are. Those are good and bad. You know, fine when the context is digital advertising, less fine when it's the safety of a commercial jet, right? Right. There is another part of artificial intelligence called deterministic artificial intelligence. They often get expressed as expert systems. Those generally got a bad name with the flops of the early 80s and then research, and then the flops that flopped because of scale, by the way, and then the flops in the early 2000s and 10s from IBM's ill-fated Watson experiment. The promise did not meet the reality. It's in that deterministic AI that magic is to be found, especially when deployed in conjunction with the probabilistic AI. That's where really the future is holds. I don't have there's some people who have a religious view of, oh, it's only going to be a probabilistic world, but there's many people like myself and not to bring up, you know, fancy names, but Andrew Ng, who's I think a brilliant AI researcher and investor, also shares this view that it's a mix of probabilistic and deterministic AI. What deterministic AI does is it, to put it simply, it kind of searches the landscape of all possible connections. So if we knew that, actually, it's difference between bottoms up and tops down.
Yes.
So the traditional way of, we'll say, integrating things is looking at, for example, that hospital network and saying, oh, wow, we have 4 definitions of diabetes. Well, let me go solve this problem and create the one that works for our hospital network. Well, then pretty soon you have 5 standards, right? That's the traditional way that goes. That's what a top-down looks like. It's called a golden record often, and it rarely works because pretty soon what happens is the organizations will find again their own need for their own definition of diabetes in most all cases. So that's top-down approach, rarely works. The bottoms-up approach says, let's discover the connections between these, and we'll right. discover the relationships. We don't discover it organically like we depend on people because it's deterministic AI. We discover it through a massive, non-intuitive in some cases. It's just kind of infeasible for us to explore a trillion connections. But what the AI does is it explores a factorial number. Actually, is a technical the technical equation for it. A factorial number of possible paths that then determine the map of relationships between entities. So imagine just discovering the U.S. highway system. If you did that as a person, it's going to take a bit. If you had some infinitely fast crawlers, robots, discovering the highway system infinitely fast, remember, then that's a much more effective way of doing it. That gives you some degree of power. That's the difference between bottoms up and tops down. That's the difference between deterministic, really, we might say, and probabilistic in some simple way.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of the two coming together. And again, I just look at them as like a box that I always tell people, like, it's a box of tools. I need to know the problem, and then we can sort of reach in and pick out which set of tools that are going to come together to solve this issue, as opposed to this damn word called AI that everybody thinks is one thing that they're sort of throwing at the wall to solve a problem. But you're trying to solve, and I'm going to say, data interoperability. And on this show, like, I've had a lot of people talk about interoperability in healthcare, which I actually believe is you could break the system because things aren't working right, or I can't see what I need to see across the 2 hospitals that I need information from. But you published an essay on Medium about Haven, right? The healthcare collaboration between Amazon, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah.
Their goal was to use big data to guide patients to the best performing clinicians and the most affordable medicines. They originally were going to serve these first 3 founding companies. I think, knowing the people that started it, their vision was bigger than that. There was a huge, to do when it came out. Fireworks and everything launched in 2018. They hired Atul Gawande, like famous author, surgeon, but then Gawande left in 2020, and the company was sort of quietly, pushed off into the sunset. Your essay argued that Haven likely failed due to data interoperability challenge. I mean, how so? What specific challenges do you imagine Haven ran into?
It's funny. I say in the article very gently that I imagine this is what happened. And it's because that I hedge it that the Harvard Business Review said, oh, well, you're just guessing. Like, actually, I wasn't guessing. I know the people who are doing it. I know the challenges there, but I'm not going to quote them and get them in trouble. And they're not authorized to speak on it. So I perhaps was a little too modest in my framing of the conclusion. So this actually is what happened. What happens is, in the same way that we had the difficulty with healthcare.gov, in the same way that I described these banks having difficulty, heterogeneous databases don't like to talk to one another in a variety of different ways. The diabetes example is true, but it's just one of many cases of data just being collected differently for their own use. It can be as prosaic as first name, last name, or F dot last name. It's just that simple, and how do I bring those together? Well, those are called entity resolutions. Those are somewhat straightforward, but not often 100% solvable. This is just a pain. It's a pain. And so what Haven gets into is they're just thinking, well, we're massive. We got, like Uber, we got an effectively infinite balance sheet. We got some very smart people. We'll solve this problem. And this is some of the problem with getting ahead of yourself. Won't call it arrogance, but getting ahead of yourself is that you think, oh, I'll just be able to solve that problem. Credit where credit is due to Uber, that they looked both deeper, saying, oh, this can't be solved at the level of computer science, and they looked outside, which is often a really hard organizational exercise. That just didn't happen at Haven. They thought they could solve it themselves, and they just didn't. The databases, not only could they have had their own structure, but they also were stored in different you could say formats or by different vendors. So you have an SAP database, you have an Oracle database. That's another layer of complication. And when I say that these take $1 million to connect, that's not $1 million one way. It's actually $2 million if you want to connect it both ways. And then when you start adding 5, let alone 50, you take 50 factorial. That's a very big number already. You multiply that times 1 million, and 6 to 12 months for each, and 100 to 200 people each, and you just pretty soon it's an infeasible budget. It doesn't work. The budget for us solving Uber's problem in the traditional way was something on the order of $2 trillion. You don't do that. We had a bank in the U.S. and the budget for their vision was a couple of billion. Like it doesn't work. That's what happens with Haven. They'll get around to it, but they're slow. Like all big organizations are. They'll get around to solving this at a deeper level. We hope that we will remain leaders in database integration when they finally realize that the solution is at a deeper level than than the existing tools.
So, this is not. There's a lot of people trying to solve this problem. It's one of those areas where if we don't solve it, I don't think we're going to get healthcare to the next level to sort of manage the information and manage people and get them what they need more efficiently and drive down costs.
Yeah.
I do believe that EMRs are, I don't want to call them junk. Maybe I'm going too far, but I really think that they, if you had decided that you were going to design something to manage patients, that is not the software you would have written to start, hands down, which I worry about because these places they spend so much putting them in that trying to get them to rip them out and put something in that actually works is challenging. You guys were actually doing something in COVID-19 too, if I'm not mistaken. How is that project going? Or I don't know if it's over, but what are you learning about COVID-19 and the capabilities of your software, let's say?
Yeah. This is an important point that for anybody that's ever used Excel, we know what it means to get frustrated enough to secretly hard code a cell, not keeping a formula in a cell. That's what happens in a lot of these systems. So we will continue with electronic medical records to bring these together, but they will end up being fragile. Besides slow and expensive to construct, they will end up being fragile. because they were at some point hard coded, and what that how that then it gets expressed is the next time some other database standard appears inside of that organization's ecosystem, from an acquisition or a divestiture or a different technical standard even emerging, then the whole process starts all over again. We just experienced this with a large company that spent $100 million in about 5 years, and then they came to us and like, we know it works now, but we know like a year from now we're going to have the same, we're going to go through it again, and it's not like, oh, we'll just have a marginal difference. No, it's again that factorial issue, that one database connected to the other 50 that already exist creates the same problem all over again at a order, a couple orders of magnitude. So what we discover is these systems in the organization, they will continue to exist, these fragile systems. They'll continue to exist, they'll continue to scale, they'll continue to grow in different parts of the life sciences domain, whether it's for clinicians, whether it's for operations, whether it's for drug discovery. Those will continue to exist. They'll continue to expand, and they will begin to approach the type of compositional systems that I'm describing from quantum computers or Minecraft or smart contracts, where you then need the discovery and math that Connexus that expresses in software for databases. When you need that is when you then need to prove the efficacy or otherwise demonstrate the lack of fragility or the integrity of the semantics. Connexus will can with 100%, as a law of nature, right? It's in math. With 100% accuracy, prove the integrity of a database integration, and that matters in high consequence contexts when you're doing something as critical as drug side effects for different populations. We don't want your data to be misinterpreted. You can't afford lives to be lost, or you can't, in regulation, you can't afford data to be leaking. That's where you'll ultimately need the categorical algebra. You'll need a provable compositional system. You can continue to construct these ones that will begin to approach compositionality, but when you need the math is when you need to prove it for either the high consequence context of lives, of money, or related to that of regulation.
Well, I keep telling my kids, make sure you're proficient in math because you're going to be using it for the rest of your life. And finance. I always remind them about finance because I think they both go together. But you've got a new book coming out. It's called The Future is Formal, and not tuxedo-like formal, but like you're using the word formal. And I think you have a very specific meaning in mind. And I do want you to talk about, but I think what you're referring to is how we want automated systems to behave, meaning everything from advertising algorithms to self-driving trucks. And you can tell me if that my assumption is correct or not.
No, it's a great segue actually from the math. What I'm trying to do is bring in people that are not programmers or research information technology researchers day to day into the conversation around automated digital systems. That's my motivation, and my motivation is powered by the belief that we will bring out the best of the technology with more people engaged, and with more people engaged, we have a chance to embrace it and not resist it. My greatest fear, I will say, selfishly, is that we come up with technology that people just reject. They just veto it because they don't understand it. As a citizen, that also presents a danger, because I think that companies, commercial expressions, naturally will grow towards where their technology is needed. So this is actually, to some extent, a threat to Western security relative to Chinese competition, that we embrace the technology in the way that we want it to be expressed in our society. So I'm trying to bring people into this conversation, even if they're not programmers. The connection to math is that there are 18 million computer programmers in the world. We don't need 18 million in one, but what we do need is we do need people to be thinking I say in a formal way, but also just be thinking about the values that are going to be represented in these digital infrastructures. You know, somewhere as a society, we will have to have a conversation with ourselves to determine the car driving to the crosswalk, braking or rolling, or slowing or stopping completely. And then who's liable if it doesn't? Is it the driver? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the programmer that somehow put a bug in their code? You know, we're entering an age where we're going to start experiencing what some person calls double bugs. There's the bug in maybe one's expression in code. This often could be the semantics, or in English, like your English doesn't make sense,
Right.
right? Or was it actually an error in your thinking? You know, did you leave a gap in your thinking? This is often where some of the bugs in Ethereum and smart contracts have been expressed, where, you know, there's an old programming rule where you don't want to say something equals true. You always want to be saying true equals something. If you do the former, not the latter, you can actually create bugs that can create security breaches. It's just a small little error in thinking. That's not an error in semantics. That level of thinking, you don't need to know calculus for, or category
Right.
theory for that matter. You just need to be thinking in a formal way. You know, often lawyers, accountants, engineers, you know, anybody with scientific training can more quickly get this idea, where those that are educated in liberal arts can contribute is in reminding themselves of the broader context that wants to be expressed, because often engineers can be overly reductionist. So there's really there's a push and pull, or, you know, an interplay between those two sensibilities that then we want to express in rules. And that's ultimately what I mean by formal rules. Tell me exactly what you mean. Tell me exactly how that is going to work. You know, physicians would understand this when they think about drug effects and drug side effects. They know exactly what it's going to be supposed to be doing, you know, with some degree of probability, but they can be very clear about it. It's that clear thinking that all of us will need to exercise as we think about the development and deployment of modern automated digital systems.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because that's this other thing I tell people, like when they say, what should my kid take? I'm like, have them take a you know, basic programming thing, not because they're going to do it for a living, but they'll understand how this thing is structured, and they can wrap their mind around how it is. And, you know, I see how my nephew thinks, who's from the computer science world, and how I think. And sometimes, you know, it's funny watching him think, or one of the CTOs of one of our companies, how he looks at the world. And I'm like, you got to back up a little bit and look at the bigger picture, right? And so it's the two of us coming together that make more magic than one or the other by themselves. So, you know, I want to jump back sort of to the different roles you've had in your career. Like you said, you've been a technology investor, a serial startup founder, a university professor, an academic administrator, an entrepreneur, a management instructor, presidential innovation fellow. I don't think I've missed anything, but I may have. You're also a speaker, a commentator, an author. Which one of those is most rewarding?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Which one of those is most rewarding? I'm not sure. I find it to be rewarding to be with my friends and family. So it's rewarding to be with people. I find that to be rewarding. In those particular expressions, my motivation is to be, just bringing people in to have a conversation about what we want our world to look like. You know, the degree to which the technologies that I work with every day are closer to the dystopia of Hollywood narratives, or closer to our hopes around the utopia that's possible. That where this is in that spectrum is up to us in our conversation around what these things want to look like. We have some glimpses of both extremes, but I'd like people, and I find it to be rewarding, to just be helping facilitate helping catalyze that conversation. So the catalyst of that conversation, in whatever form it takes, is where I enjoy being.
Yeah, because I was thinking about, like, what can you do as an individual that shapes the future? Does any of these roles stand out more impactful than others, let's say?
I think the future is in this notion of composability. I feel strongly about that, and I want to enroll people into this paradigm as a framework from which to see many of the activities going around us. Why have NFTs come on the public in the public media so quickly? Why the cryptocurrency capture our imagination? Those are and TikTok and the metaverse. Those are all expressions of this quick reconfiguration of patterns in different contexts that themselves are going to become easier and easier to express. The future is going to be owned by people that take the special knowledge that they've acquired and then put it into short business expressions. I'm going to call them rules that then can be recontextualized and redeployed. This is my version of what, or my abstraction of what people call the future being just all TikTok. It's not literally that we're all going to be doing short dance videos. It's that TikTok is an expression of people creating short bits of content and then having those be reconfigured and redistributed. That can be in medicine, it can, or clinical practice, or in drugs, but it can be in any range of expertise or knowledge. And what's changed and what is changing is the different technologies that are being brought to bear to capture that knowledge so that it can be scalable, so it can be compositional. That's what's changing. That's what's going to be changing over the next 10 to 20 years. The more you study that, I think the better off we will be. And I'd say, for my way of thinking about math, you might say the more math, the better. But if I were to choose for my children, I would say I would replace trig and geometry and even calculus, some people will be happy to know, with categorical algebra, category theory, and with probability and statistics. So I would replace calculus, which I think is really the math of the 20th century, with something more appropriate to our digital age, which is categorical algebra.
I will tell my son, because I'm sure he'll be very excited to if I told him that, not calculus. But he's not going to be happy when I say go to this other area, because I think he'd like to get together.
It's easier than calculus. Yeah.
So, it was great having you on the show. I feel like we could talk for another hour on all these different aspects. I'm hoping that your company is truly successful and that you help us solve this interoperability problem, which is, I've been talking about it forever. It seems like, I feel like, the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'm still worried if we're any closer to solving that problem, but I'm hopeful. And I wish you great success on the launch of your new book. It sounds exciting. I'm going to have to get myself a copy.
Thank you very much. It's been fun. It's good to be with you.
Thank you.